Hello, friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. My name is Carl Tillman, and for 35 years I served as a police officer in Crosby County, Texas. For most of that time, I did the kind of work small town sheriffs do, breaking up bar fights, dealing with drunk drivers, checking on the elderly in hot weather, and occasionally chasing down some fools who still thought cattle rustling was a viable career path. The job was steady and predictable, and that was fine with me. I liked steady jobs. Steady jobs meant I could go home at the end of my shift, have dinner with my wife, Carol, and sleep through the night without my phone ringing. But then a call came that changed my whole life. Even though it was almost 10 years ago, it was still a call that kept me awake every night. I was retired now, living in an old house outside Latch, but I still couldn't get those events out of my head. I think my mental health has deteriorated. I'm not entirely sure if what I went through has truly ended. It all began on a Thursday night in February 2019. It was a very cold night for West Texas, with temperatures dropping below 20 degrees, and everything was covered in a layer of ice due to the rain that had fallen during the night. The roads had become slippery and traffic accidents had started occurring nearby. There were no serious injuries. As is the case every year, most people were trying to drive their vehicles regardless of the weather conditions. I was driving south on Highway 207 just past the county line when my radio crackled to life. It was Denise, our night dispatcher. She'd been working the desk for about 15 years, and she had that calm, measured voice that made even the worst emergency sound manageable. Unit 1, we've got a call from a residence on County Road 184. Caller reports hearing someone trying to break into their home. I picked up the radio handset. Copy that, Denise. What's the address? There was a pause. Not a long one, but long enough for me to notice. Caller didn't provide a specific address, Frank. Just said County Road 184, about 8 mi east of RS. Male caller sounded elderly, said he could hear someone at his back door. County Road 184 was a long stretch of farm road that ran through some of the most isolated land in the county. There were maybe a dozen houses spread out along that road, most of them at least a mile apart. Without a specific address, I'd be driving around in the dark looking for any sign of trouble. Did he give a name? Another pause. No, he hung up before I could get more information. That was unusual. Most people, especially elderly folks reporting a break-in, would stay on the line until help arrived. They'd be scared, wanting that connection to someone who could help them. But I'd been doing this job long enough to know that people don't always act rationally when they're frightened. All right, I'm about 20 minutes out. I'll start at the east end and work my way west. Let me know if he calls back. Copy that, Unit 1. I turned my patrol car around and headed east toward RS. The roads were slick, and I had to keep my speed down to avoid sliding into a ditch. The radio played softly in the background, some country station out of Latch, and I found myself thinking about Carol. She'd made pot roast for dinner, and I'd promised her I'd be home by midnight. It was already 11. The drive gave me time to run through the possibilities in my head. Could be a genuine break-in attempt. We'd had a few burglaries in the area over the past year, Mostly kids looking for prescription drugs or anything they could pawn for meth money. Could also be nothing. An old man hearing the wind rattle his back door and getting spooked. Could be a domestic situation, though the caller had said someone trying to break in, not a specific person. When I reached County Road 184, I turned onto the gravel road and started driving slowly, looking for any houses with lights on or any signs of disturbance. The first house I came to was dark. No vehicles in the driveway, no signs of life. I knew the people who lived there, the Hendersons, a retired couple who spent their winters in Arizona. The house would be empty until April. I continued driving east, checking each property I passed. Most of them were dark, buttoned up for the night. One house had lights on in the front windows, but I could see a family through the curtains sitting around a television that didn't match the profile of someone reporting a break-in. About 6 miles down the road, I came to an old farmhouse that sat about 200 yards off the road. There was a light on in one of the back rooms, visible through the bare branches of the cottonwood trees in the yard. The driveway was dirt and gravel, rutted from years of use, and there was a mailbox at the road with a name I couldn't quite make out in the darkness. I pulled into the driveway and called it in. "Denise, I'm checking a residence at approximately mile marker 6 on County Road 184. You got anything on the owner of this property? Stand by, Frank." I waited, watching the house. The light in the back room flickered slightly, like someone had walked past it. There was an old Chevy pickup parked near the house, probably 20 years old, with a layer of ice coating the windshield. Denise came back on the radio. "That property is owned by Raymond Cobb. He's 83 years old, lives alone. No history of calls to that address. Raymond Cobb." The name sounded vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place it. Probably someone I'd met once or twice over the years at the feed store or the diner in town. Copy that. I'm going to make contact. I got out of my car and approached the house, my boots crunching on the icy gravel. The porch light wasn't on, but I could see well enough by the light from the back room. The front door was solid wood, painted white but peeling in places. I knocked firmly. "Mr. Cobb, this is Sheriff Tillman with Crosby County. We got a call about a possible break-in at this address." No response. I waited, listening. I could hear a television playing inside, the muffled sound of voices and canned laughter. I knocked again, harder this time. "Mr. Cobb, sir, I need you to come to the door." Still nothing. I tried the door handle, locked. I walked around to the side of the house, checking the windows. They were all closed, some of them covered with heavy curtains. When I reached the back of the house, I found the door that led into what looked like a kitchen. The light was on inside, and I could see through the window in the door. The kitchen was old but clean. Laminate countertops, white metal cabinets, a small table with 2 chairs, and sitting at that table with his back to me was an elderly man. He was wearing a flannel shirt and had thin white hair. He wasn't moving. I knocked on the door, "Mr. Cobb." He didn't turn around, didn't react at all. I tried the door handle, also locked. My radio crackled. "Unit 1, I've got another call coming in from County Road 184. Same male caller says someone is at his back door right now." I keyed my radio. "Denise, I'm at the back door of what I believe is the caller's residence. I can see an elderly male inside, but he's not responding to me. I might need EMS out here." Copy that, Frank. "But this caller is insisting someone is trying to break in right now. He sounds terrified." I looked at the man sitting at the table. He still hadn't moved. "Denise, Ask the caller to describe his house. I need to make sure I'm at the right location. There was a pause. Then Denise came back on. He says he lives in a white farmhouse with a red barn about 100 yards behind it. Has a cottonwood tree in the front yard. I looked around. There was indeed a structure behind the house that could have been a barn at one point, though it was too dark to tell what color it was. And there was definitely a cottonwood tree in the front yard. That matches this location, Denise. But the man inside isn't responding. I'm going to force entry and check on his welfare. I tried the back door one more time, putting my shoulder against it. The wood was old and the frame gave way with a crack that seemed too loud in the quiet night. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The kitchen smelled like coffee and old newspapers. The television was playing in another room. I could hear it clearly now, some late-night talk show. The man at the table still hadn't moved, and as I got closer, I could see why. He was dead. Had been for at least a few hours, maybe longer. His skin had that waxy gray quality that bodies get when the blood stops flowing. His hands were resting on the table in front of him, and there was a cup of coffee beside him, long since gone cold. His eyes were open, staring at nothing. I checked for a pulse anyway, pressing my fingers against his neck. Nothing. His skin was cold to the touch. I keyed my radio. Denise, I need EMS and the coroner out here. I've got a deceased male at this location. Appears to be natural causes, but will need confirmation. Copy that, Frank. They're en route. I stood there in that kitchen looking at Raymond Cobb and tried to make sense of what had happened. Someone had called 911 twice reporting a break-in at this address, but the man who lived here had been dead for hours. He couldn't have made those calls. Denise, are you sure those calls came from this address? Checking now, Frank. I walked through the house while I waited for her response. The living room had an old recliner facing a television that was still on. There were newspapers stacked on a side table, some of them weeks old. A small bedroom off the hallway had an unmade bed and clothes scattered on the floor. Everything looked normal, lived in. There were no signs of a struggle, no indication that anyone had broken in. Denise came back on the radio. Frank, I've got the call logs here. Both calls came from a landline registered to this address. The phone company confirms the calls originated from inside the house. I found the phone in the kitchen, an old rotary model mounted on the wall near the refrigerator. I picked up the receiver and listened. There was a dial tone. Denise, the phone here is working, but the homeowner has been deceased for several hours. He couldn't have made those calls. There was a long pause. Frank, I don't know what to tell you. I took both calls myself. It was definitely a male voice. Elderly, said someone was trying to break in. I stood there in that kitchen with a dead man at the table and tried to think of a logical explanation. Maybe Raymond Cobb had made a call before he died, and there was a delay in the system. Maybe someone else had been in the house and made the call, then left before I arrived. Maybe I was at the wrong house, and the real caller was somewhere else on County Road 184. But I knew that last one wasn't true. This was the only house on this stretch of road that matched the description, and the calls had come from this phone in this house. Denise, when exactly did the second call come in? About 5 minutes ago. Right before I radioed you 5 minutes ago, I'd been standing at this back door, looking through the window at Raymond Cobb, sitting at his table, and someone had called 911 from inside this house, using this phone while I was standing right outside. My radio crackled again. Unit 1, I've got a third call. Same location, same caller. He says someone just broke the lock on his back door and is coming inside. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I was standing in the kitchen right next to the back door that I had just forced open. The door that I had broken to get inside. Denise, what is the caller saying right now? He says he can see a man in his kitchen. Says the man is standing right next to him. I looked at the phone on the wall. Then I looked at Raymond Cobb's body still sitting at the table. Then I looked at the back door hanging open with the broken frame. Denise, tell the caller I'm the sheriff. Tell him I'm here to help him. There was a pause. Then Frank, he's screaming. He says the man in his kitchen is reaching for him. I wasn't reaching for anything. I was standing perfectly still trying to understand what was happening. But somewhere, somehow, Raymond Cobb was on the phone with my dispatcher watching me in his kitchen. Denise, is he still on the line? No, he hung up, just dropped the phone. I walked over to the table and looked down at Raymond Cobb's face. His eyes were still open, still staring at nothing. But in the fluorescent light of the kitchen, I could see something I hadn't noticed before. His lips were slightly parted and there was something dark around his mouth. Not blood, something else. Something that looked almost like ash. My radio crackled again, and this time Denise's voice was different, quieter, uncertain. Frank, I'm getting another call. Same number, but there's no one talking, just breathing. I picked up the phone receiver from the wall and listened. There was no dial tone anymore, just silence. No, not silence. There was something there. A soft sound, rhythmic, like someone breathing very slowly. Denise, I can hear it too on this phone. Frank, that's not possible. You're on a different line. Unless what? Unless the calls weren't really coming from different lines. Unless they were coming from somewhere else entirely. I hung up the phone and stepped back from the table. EMS would be here soon, and the coroner, and I'd have to explain all of this in a report that would make me sound insane. But I needed to get out of this house. Needed to be outside where things made sense. As I walked toward the broken back door, my radio crackled one more time. Unit 1, I've got dispatch records showing that Raymond Cobb called 911 14 times over the past 6 months. Every call was the same. Someone trying to break into his house. Every call came after midnight, and Frank, every single time we sent someone to check on him. Different deputies, different shifts. They all reported the same thing. No one there. No signs of a break-in. No answer at the door. I stood in the doorway looking back at Raymond Cobb's body. Why wasn't I told about this? Because each time, by the time the deputy arrived, Mr. Cobb would call back and say everything was fine. False alarm. He'd apologize, say he must have been hearing things. We filed them all as unfounded calls. The wind picked up outside, rattling the bare branches of the cottonwood tree. I could see the red and blue lights of the EMS truck coming up the driveway. But tonight was different, Denise continued. Tonight, he didn't call back to say it was fine. Because tonight, I thought he couldn't, because tonight Raymond Cobb was already dead when the first call came in. The EMS crew confirmed what I already knew. Raymond Cobb had been dead for at least 8 hours, probably longer. Heart attack most likely. The coroner would need to do an autopsy to be sure, but there were no signs of foul play. He'd simply sat down at his kitchen table, probably to have his evening coffee, and his heart had given out. It happens, especially to men in their 80s who live alone and don't take care of themselves. But that didn't explain the phone calls. I spent the next 3 hours at that house going over every detail with Deputy Martin, who'd arrived to assist with the scene. We checked every window, every door, every possible entry point. The only damage to the house was the back door that I'd forced open. There were no signs that anyone else had been there, no footprints in the icy ground, no disturbed snow on the porch. We checked the phone records with the company. All 3 calls that night had originated from the landline in Raymond Cobb's kitchen. The phone company could even provide the exact time of each call down to the second. 11:43 p.m., 12:07 a.m., and 12:11 a.m. I'd forced open the back door at 12:10 a.m., 1 minute before the 3rd call. Martin didn't want to talk about it. He helped me secure the scene, helped me file the paperwork, and then he went home. I could see it in his eyes. He wanted to treat this as a straightforward death investigation and move on. And maybe that was the smart thing to do, but I couldn't let it go. Over the next few weeks, I started pulling records from the department's call logs. Denise had been right. Raymond Cobb had called 911 times over the past 6 months. Every call was after midnight. Every call was about someone trying to break into his house. And every time a deputy had responded and found nothing wrong. I tracked down the deputies who'd taken those calls. Most of them didn't remember the details. It had been filed as a welfare check. Nothing unusual, just an elderly man who was probably getting confused or lonely. But Deputy Corinne Walsh remembered. She'd responded to 3 of the calls. He was scared, Frank, she told me when I asked her about it. We were sitting in the break room at the station drinking coffee that tasted like it had been made the day before. I mean really scared, not just some old man getting confused. He was convinced someone was trying to get into his house. Did you see anything? Any signs of an attempted break-in? She shook her head. Nothing. I checked the whole property. All the doors and windows were locked from the inside. No footprints, no marks on the doors, nothing. But he insisted he could hear someone at his back door. What did you tell him? I told him to call if he heard anything else. Told him I'd cruise by his place a few times during my shift. He seemed to calm down after that. She paused, staring into her coffee cup. Frank, you want to know the weird part. What's that? Every time I responded to his house, it was right around midnight. I mean exactly midnight, give or take a few minutes. And every time when I was leaving, I'd look back at the house and see him standing in the kitchen window, watching me drive away, just standing there, not moving, like a statue. I felt a chill run down my spine. Did he wave or acknowledge you? No, he just stood there. I figured he was making sure I was really leaving. You know, old folks can be paranoid like that. I thanked her for her time and went back to my office. I spread out all the call records on my desk and started making a timeline. 14 calls over 6 months. That averaged out to about 2 calls per month, but they weren't evenly distributed. The first few calls had been spaced out. 1 in September, 1 in October, 2 in November, but then they started coming more frequently. 3 in December, 4 in January, and 3 in February before the night he died. And they all came at the same time, between 11:43 p.m. and 12:15 a.m. every single one. I started thinking about what Corinne Walsh had said about Raymond Cobb standing in the window watching her leave. Standing there like a statue, not moving. And I thought about how I'd found him, sitting at his table with his eyes open, staring at nothing. How long had he been sitting there before he died? Hours, days. I called the coroner's office and got the autopsy report. Raymond Cobb had died of cardiac arrest, just as we'd suspected. But there was something else in the report that caught my attention. The coroner estimated the time of death at approximately 4 yank p.m. on the day I'd found him. That meant he'd been dead for almost 8 hours before the first 911 call came in that night. I sat in my office staring at that report and tried to make sense of it. A dead man had called 911 3 times. A dead man had described someone breaking into his house while I was standing right there looking at his body. A dead man had screamed while I was in his kitchen. Unless it wasn't Raymond Cobb making those calls. The thought sent ice through my veins. If it wasn't Raymond Cobb, then who was it? Who had been calling from his phone using his voice describing exactly what was happening in his house while it was happening? I decided to drive back out to the house. It had been 3 weeks since Raymond Cobb's death, and the property was still sitting empty while his estate was being settled. He had no living relatives that anyone could find, and his property would eventually be sold at auction to cover whatever debts he'd left behind. I went at night around the same time I'd first responded to the call. The house looked different in the darkness, more isolated, more abandoned. The yellow crime scene tape we'd strung across the doors had been torn away by the wind, and the back door I'd forced open was now covered with a piece of plywood that someone had nailed in place. I sat in my patrol car in the driveway looking at the house, and I felt that same unease I'd felt the first night. Something was wrong here, something beyond a lonely old man dying alone in his kitchen. My radio crackled, making me jump. It was Denise, Unit 1. We've got a call from a residence on County Road 184. Caller reports hearing someone trying to break into their home. My blood turned to ice. Denise, what's the address? There was a pause. Caller didn't provide a specific address. Frank just said County Road 184, about 8 mi east of RS. Male caller sounded elderly, said he could hear someone at his back door. I stared at the house in front of me, at the plywood covering the back door, at the dark windows. Denise, when did this call come in? Just now, about 30 seconds ago. He's still on the line. I got out of my car, my hand instinctively going to my weapon. What's he saying? He's saying, Frank, he says there's a patrol car in his driveway. Says he can see it through his front window. I looked at the house. The windows were all dark. There was no one there. Denise, tell him I'm going to approach the house. Tell him to stay on the line. I walked toward the front door, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The porch was covered in dead leaves and debris. The door was still locked just as we'd left it. Frank, he's describing you. Says you're at his front door right now. He's asking if you're really the sheriff. I knocked on the door. Mr. Cobb, this is Sheriff Tillman. I'm here to help you. My radio crackled. Frank, he says he knows you're there to help, but it's too late. They're already inside. Who's inside? He won't say. He just keeps repeating that it's too late. I tried the door, still locked. I walked around to the back of the house to the plywood-covered door. It was secure, nailed in place. Denise, where's the caller now? He's still on the line. He's not talking anymore, just breathing. I put my ear against the plywood and listened. I could hear it. The soft, rhythmic sound of someone breathing, slow and steady, coming from inside the house. Frank, he's saying something. He's saying they come at midnight every night, and every night I call for help, but no one can stop them. I stepped back from the door. Denise, tell him he hung up. Frank, I stood there in the darkness listening to the wind rattle the bare branches of the cottonwood tree. Then slowly I walked back to my car and got inside. My radio was silent for a long moment. Then Denise's voice came through, quieter than usual. Frank, that makes 15 calls from this address. Should I log it as unfounded? I started my engine and put the car in reverse. Yeah, log it as unfounded. Are you heading back to the station? I looked at the house one more time in my rear view mirror. One of the windows was glowing now, a faint light visible through the curtains. The same window where Corinne Walsh had seen Raymond Cobb standing, watching her leave. Yeah, I'm heading back, but I knew I'd be back here again. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but sometime soon. Denise would get another call from County Road 184. A male caller, elderly, scared, saying someone was trying to break into his house and someone would have to respond. Because that's what we do. We answer the calls even when we know no one's really there. Even when we know it's already too late. Even when we know that some people are so scared of dying alone that they keep calling for help long after their hearts have stopped beating. I retired 6 months after that night. Told Carol I was done, that 32 years was enough. She didn't ask questions, and I didn't offer explanations. Some things you can't explain, even to the people who know you best. The new sheriff who took over after me is a good man named David Torres. Young, ambitious, smart, he'll do fine. I met with him once during the transition, going over the peculiarities of the county, the roads that flood in spring, the bars that need extra attention on Friday nights, the families who have feuds going back generations. At the end of our meeting, I almost told him about Raymond Cobb, almost warned him about the calls that would come from County Road 184. But I didn't, because what would I say? How do you tell someone that there's a house in their county where a dead man keeps calling for help? How do you explain that some dispatches never really end? I still keep my old radio scanner in my garage. Carol doesn't know why. Late at night when I can't sleep, I turn it on and listen to the county frequencies. Most nights it's quiet. Domestic disturbances, traffic stops, the usual small-town police work, but every few weeks, usually on a Thursday night, I hear Denise's voice come over the radio. Unit responding. We've got a call from a residence on County Road 184. Caller reports hearing someone trying to break into their home. And then I hear whoever's on duty that night respond. Sometimes it's Torres himself. Sometimes it's one of the deputies I used to work with. They drive out there, check the house, find nothing wrong, log it as unfounded. None of them know about the 14 calls that came before they took the job. None of them know about Raymond Cobb, sitting at his kitchen table with his eyes open, watching something the rest of us can't see. And none of them know that every time they respond to that house, Raymond Cobb is watching them from the kitchen window, standing perfectly still, making sure they're really there, making sure he's not alone. Because I think that's what hell is really. Not fire and brimstone, not demons and pitchforks. Just an eternity of being alone and afraid, calling for help that never comes. Or worse, help that comes but can never save you because you're already beyond saving. I've thought about going back out there, back to that house on County Road 184. Maybe during the day when things don't seem quite so oppressive. Maybe I'd find something I missed the first time, some explanation that would make sense of it all. But I know I won't, because deep down I know the truth. There's nothing to find, no rational explanation. Just a lonely old man who was so terrified of dying alone that he imprinted that fear onto the place where he died. And now that fear replays itself every few weeks, like a recording stuck on loop. The house sold at auction last year. A young couple from Leech bought it for cheap, planning to fix it up as a weekend retreat. I don't know their names. I don't want to know. But I hope they're the kind of people who sleep soundly at night. The kind who don't notice small sounds. The kind who wouldn't think twice about an old rotary phone ringing at midnight. Because it will ring. Maybe not at first, maybe not for months. But eventually, on some Thursday night, when the temperature drops below freezing and the wind is rattling the branches of that cottonwood tree, the phone will ring. And whoever answers will hear an elderly man's voice, scared and alone, saying someone is trying to break into his house, saying he can hear them at the back door, saying he needs help right now. And maybe they'll call 911 and maybe a deputy will respond. And maybe the cycle will start all over again. Or maybe they won't answer. Maybe they'll let it ring and ring until it finally stops. Maybe that would be better. Maybe that's what Raymond Cobb really needs. For someone to not come, to not break down his door, to not stand in his kitchen while he watches from the other side of whatever separates the living from the dead. Maybe he needs permission to stop calling, permission to stop being afraid, permission to finally let go. But I don't think that's going to happen because fear doesn't work like that. Fear doesn't ask for permission, it just is. And some fears are strong enough to outlive the people who feel them. I was at the hardware store last week buying some supplies to fix a broken fence post in my backyard when I ran into Tors. He looked tired, the way all sheriffs look after a few years on the job. "Frank," he said, nodding at me, "how's retirement treating you? Can't complain, you staying busy, always." He paused, then added, "Hey, I've been meaning to ask you something. You ever have problems with false calls from County Road 184 out past RWS?" My hand tightened on the bag of fence staples I was holding. "What kind of a problems?" "I don't know, probably nothing. But we keep getting these calls from an old farmhouse out there. Someone saying they hear an intruder, but every time we respond, there's no one home. House is empty. New owners are never there. How often? Maybe once a month. Always at night. Always the same voice on the phone. Male, elderly, but the phone company says the landline at that address hasn't been active in over a year." I looked at him for a long moment. He was waiting for me to tell him something, to offer some explanation or advice, but what could I say? Some calls, I finally said, you can't do anything about. You just have to respond and do your job. He nodded slowly like he understood, but also didn't. "Yeah, that's what I figured." We talked about other things for a few minutes. His wife was pregnant with their first child. My fence kept needing repairs, and then we said goodbye. I watched him walk out to his patrol car, young and strong and certain that he could handle whatever came his way. I hope he can. I really do. But I know that someday, maybe years from now, when he's retired and someone else is wearing the sheriff's badge, he'll be the one standing in a hardware store having this same conversation, trying to explain to the new sheriff that there are some calls you can't solve, some fears you can't calm, some dispatches that never really end. And he'll see that same look in their eyes that I saw in his. That mixture of confusion and concern, and the beginning of understanding that this job changes you in ways you don't expect, because that's what we don't tell people when they pin on the badge. We don't tell them that the job isn't really about catching criminals or writing tickets or keeping the peace. It's about standing between people and their fears. And sometimes those fears are so strong, so overwhelming that they don't die when the people who feel them die. Sometimes they just keep calling and calling and calling. And somewhere in a house on County Road 184, Raymond Cobb is still sitting at his kitchen table, staring at his back door, waiting for midnight, waiting for the sound of someone trying to break in, waiting for the moment when he can pick up the phone and call for help one more time, because that's all he has left. That moment of connection, that brief second when someone on the other end of the line hears his voice and sends help. It doesn't matter that the help can't save him. It doesn't matter that he's already dead. What matters is that for just a few minutes he's not alone. And isn't that what we all want really? When we're scared and dying and the darkness is closing in, just to know that someone heard us, that someone came, even if they're too late, especially if they're too late. Because being too late means you were trying. Means someone cared enough to break down a door and walk into a dark house and stand in a kitchen where a dead man is sitting at his table staring at nothing. It means someone answered the call. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's all any of us can ask for. I still listen to that scanner sometimes late at night when Carol is asleep and the house is quiet. I listen to the deputies responding to calls. Their voice is calm and professional over the radio, and I wait for that one call. The one I know is coming. The one that says someone on County Road 184 needs help. And when it comes, I close my eyes and say a small prayer for whoever responds, because I know what they're going to find. And I know what they're going to hear. And I know that for the rest of their career, maybe for the rest of their lives, they'll be wondering if it was real, if they really heard that voice, if they really felt that presence, if they really saw someone standing in the kitchen window watching them leave, or if it was all in their imagination, a trick of the light, a symptom of stress and too many night shifts and not enough sleep. But deep down, they'll know the truth, the same truth I know. Raymond Cobb is still there, still waiting, still calling. And he'll keep calling until someone finally figures out how to answer in a way that brings him peace. Until someone can walk into that house and tell him it's okay, that he's not alone, that he can finally rest. But I don't think that day is coming. I don't think anyone knows how to give a dead man peace. We can only respond to the calls and break down the doors and stand in the darkness, bearing witness to fears we don't understand. And maybe that has to be enough. Maybe that's all we can ever do. It's been 6 years now. 6 years since I found Raymond Cobb sitting at his kitchen table. 6 years since I heard his voice on the phone describing me standing in his kitchen while I looked at his dead body. Carol passed away last year. Cancer. It was quick, at least 3 months from diagnosis to funeral. I held her hand at the end, and her last words to me were, "Don't be alone, Frank. Don't end up alone." I think about those words a lot, especially at night when the house is too quiet and I can't sleep. I think about Raymond Cobb sitting alone in his farmhouse, dying with no one around to hold his hand or tell him it would be okay. I think about how terrified he must have been, feeling his heart starting to fail, knowing he was going to die alone. And I think about all those calls he made, all those times he reached out for help, for connection, for someone to break through his isolation. Even if it was just for a few minutes, even if it was just a deputy checking his property and then leaving, it was something. It was someone. I understand that now in a way I couldn't before. I understand why he keeps calling, why he won't stop. Because stopping means accepting the silence, accepting the emptiness, accepting that you're truly, completely alone. And that's a kind of death that's worse than the physical kind. So I listen to my scanner and I wait for the calls. And when I hear them, I send my own small prayer out into the night to wherever Raymond Cobb is, to whatever part of him is still trapped in that house on County Road 184. I tell him I hear him. I tell him someone knows he's there. I tell him he's not alone. I don't know if he can hear me. I don't know if it matters, but I do it anyway. Because that's what we owe each other, isn't it? The acknowledgement, the witness, the simple act of saying, I see you, I hear you. You matter even after death, especially after death. That's what I should have told Tors when he asked me about those calls. That's what I should tell everyone who wears a badge and responds to strange calls in the middle of the night. You're not just answering a dispatch. You're bearing witness to someone's fear, someone's loneliness, someone's desperate need not to be forgotten. And sometimes that person can't be helped, can't be saved, can't be comforted, but they can be heard. And maybe in the end, that's all that matters. The hearing, the responding, the simple act of showing up even when you know you're too late. Last night, I had a dream. I was back in that kitchen on County Road 184, standing next to the table where Raymond Cobb's body sat. But this time, he wasn't staring at nothing. He was looking at me and he was smiling. Not a happy smile, not a grateful smile, just a smile of recognition, of understanding. Like he knew that I finally got it, that I finally understood what he'd been trying to tell me all along. We're all alone in the end, all of us. No matter how many people love us, no matter how many hands hold ours, no matter how many voices tell us it's going to be okay, in that final moment, we're alone with our fear. And the only thing that makes it bearable is knowing that someone will remember, someone will care, someone will answer the call, even if it's too late. I woke up with tears on my face, Carol's side of the bed empty beside me, the scanner in the garage crackling with the night shift's routine traffic. And I understood. Raymond Cobb isn't haunting that house because he's angry or vengeful. He's not trying to scare anyone. He's not even trying to get help anymore. He's just reminding us, all of us, that someday we'll be the ones making that call. Someday we'll be the ones sitting alone in the dark, listening for the sound of footsteps that might be coming to save us or might be coming to hurt us. And in that moment, we'll understand why he keeps calling. We'll understand why he can't stop. Because the alternative is silence, and silence is so much worse. Music. My name is Robert Kenner, and I was deputy sheriff in Hockley County for 19 years before what happened at the Merrick place made me turn in my badge. I'm 54 years old now, living in a small apartment in Levelland, and I still can't drive past that property without feeling my chest tighten and my hands start to shake. People in town think I retired early because of my back. That's what I told them anyway. Bad back, doctor's orders, time to take it easy. It's easier than telling the truth. Easier than explaining that there are some places in this world that aren't right, that shouldn't exist, and that once you've been inside one of them, you can never really leave. The Merrick place sat about 12 mi west of Levelland off Farm Road 1585. It was an old two-story farmhouse that had been built sometime in the 1940s. White clapboard siding that had gone gray over the years, with a sagging porch and windows that always seemed darker than they should be, even in full daylight. The property was 40 acres of scrubland, nothing special, the kind of place you drive past 100 times without giving it a second thought. The house had been empty for about 8 years when I first got the call. The previous owner, an old widow named Patricia Merrick, had died in a nursing home in Latch, and the property had sat vacant while her estate went through probate. By the time everything was settled, the house had fallen into disrepair. The roof was missing shingles, The porch steps were rotting and the yard had gone to weeds and moss-white bushes. Nobody wanted to buy it. The price kept dropping at auction, but there were no takers. People in the county knew the place, knew its reputation, and they wanted nothing to do with it. There were stories, of course. There are always stories about empty houses in rural Texas. Stories about lights in the windows at night, about sounds coming from inside, about animals that wouldn't go near the property. I didn't put much stock in stories. In my experience, empty houses attracted teenagers looking for a place to drink and homeless folks looking for shelter. The strange sounds were usually just the wind or raccoons in the attic. The lights were flashlights or headlights from the road reflecting off the windows at odd angles. But I'd never been inside the Merrick place. Never had a reason to. That changed on a Saturday in October of 2021. I was working the day shift driving patrol in the western part of the county when dispatch called me. Unit 7. We've got a request for a welfare check at 4892 Farm Road, 1585. Complainant is a real estate agent who says she's been inside the property and found something concerning. I knew that address, the Merrick place. Someone was finally trying to sell it. Copy that dispatch. What did she find? She wouldn't say over the phone, just asked for an officer to meet her at the property as soon as possible. She's waiting outside. I turned on to Farm Road 1585 and headed west. It was a clear October day, temperature in the low 70s, the kind of weather that makes West Texas almost pleasant. As I drove, I found myself thinking about Patricia Merrick. I'd met her a few times before she went into the nursing home, mostly responding to calls about suspicious vehicles near her property. She'd been a small woman, probably in her 80s, with sharp eyes and a way of looking at you that made you feel like she could see right through whatever you were saying. The last time I'd seen her was maybe 10 years ago. She'd called about hearing noises in her attic, voices, she said, people talking when no one should be there. I checked the attic, found nothing but insulation in old boxes, and chalked it up to a lonely old woman hearing things. She'd thanked me for checking, but had given me that look. That look that said she knew I didn't believe her, but she wasn't going to argue about it. When I pulled up to the property, there was a silver SUV parked in the driveway with Mackenzie really printed on the side. A woman in her 40s was standing next to it, arms crossed, staring at the house. She looked relieved when she saw my patrol car. "Officer, thank you for coming," she said as I got out. "I'm Jennifer Mackenzie. I called about the welfare check." "Deputy Kenner," I said. "What seems to be the problem, ma'am?" She glanced at the house, then back at me. "I'm not sure how to explain this. I was inside doing a walkthrough for a potential buyer, taking photos, that sort of thing. And I found something upstairs in one of the bedrooms." "What did you find?" "It's easier if I show you." "Would you mind coming inside with me? I don't want to go back in there alone. That should have been my first warning. Real estate agents see all kinds of things in empty houses. Squatters, drug paraphernalia, dead animals, mold, structural damage. Whatever she'd found had rattled her enough that she didn't want to go back inside alone. We walked up to the front porch. The wood creaked under our feet, and I made a mental note to watch my step. The front door was unlocked, hanging slightly open. Jennifer pushed it wider and stepped inside. The interior of the house was dim, even with afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. There was a smell, too. Not quite rot, but something organic and stale, like old newspapers or dried flowers. The furniture was still there, covered in white sheets that had gone yellow with age. The hardwood floors were thick with dust, and I could see our footprints clearly as we walked through the front hallway. "Upstairs," Jennifer said quietly. "Second bedroom on the right." We climbed the stairs, each step groaning under our weight. The second floor was even dimmer than the first, the windows smaller and the hallway narrower. Jennifer led me to a bedroom at the end of the hall and stopped at the doorway. "In there," she said, not moving. I looked past her into the room. It was a typical old bedroom, a metal bed frame with a bare mattress, a dresser against one wall, a closet with a door that hung at an angle. But what caught my attention was the wall opposite the door. Someone had written on it. Not graffiti, not spray paint, but writing. Hundreds, maybe thousands of words written in what looked like pencil or charcoal, covering the entire wall from floor to ceiling. The handwriting was small, cramped, frantic. I stepped into the room to get a closer look. As I got nearer to the wall, I could make out some of the words. "It breathes at night." I can hear it in the walls under the floor. "It breathes and never stops breathing." The same phrases repeated over and over, filling every inch of wall space. "It knows I'm here. It knows I'm listening. It breathes louder when I try to sleep. I can't leave. I tried to leave. It won't let me leave. The house breathes and I have to stay and listen." I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't just vandalism. This was something else. Something that suggested serious mental distress. "Did Patricia Merrick write this?" I asked. Jennifer nodded. "That's what I thought." There's more in the other bedrooms. Not as much, but similar writing. And downstairs in the kitchen, there are marks on the walls like someone was counting days. I walked through the rest of the upstairs. She was right. In each bedroom, there was writing on at least one wall. The same phrases, the same frantic handwriting. "The house breathes. It won't let me leave. I have to listen." In the bathroom, someone had written on the mirror in what looked like soap, "It knows." We went back downstairs to the kitchen. The walls were covered in tally marks, hundreds of them organized in groups of 5. I counted quickly. There had to be at least 2,000 marks. How long was Mrs. Merrick alone in this house before she went into the nursing home? I asked. According to the records, about 6 years. She was living here by herself after her husband died. 6 years alone in this house, writing on the walls, counting the days. "Deputy Kenner, there's one more thing," Jennifer said. "Come here." She led me to a door off the kitchen that I assumed led to the basement. She opened it, revealing wooden stairs descending into darkness. "I didn't go down there," she said. But listen, we stood at the top of the stairs in silence. At first I didn't hear anything. Then very faintly I heard it. A sound like breathing, slow, rhythmic, coming from somewhere below us in the darkness. In and out, in and out. "It's probably just the HVAC system," I said. "Old houses make all kinds of sounds." But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. The sound was too organic, too regular. It sounded exactly like someone breathing. "Do you want me to check it out?" I asked. Jennifer shook her head quickly. "No, I mean, if you think you should, but I don't think there's anyone down there." She was right, of course. There probably wasn't anyone down there. Just pipes and old furnace equipment and the acoustic quirks of an old house. But something about the way she said it made me hesitate. I pulled out my flashlight and started down the stairs. They were steeper than I expected and darker. My flashlight beam seemed to get swallowed up by the darkness below. I could still hear that breathing sound louder now, echoing off the basement walls. The basement was unfinished, just concrete walls and a dirt floor. There was an old furnace in one corner, rusty and probably non-functional. Boxes were stacked against the walls, and I could see the usual basement debris, broken furniture, old paint cans, pieces of lumber, but the breathing sound was louder down here. Much louder. It seemed to be coming from everywhere at once, from the walls themselves. I walked around the basement, checking behind the furnace, looking in the corners, trying to find the source of the sound, but there was nothing. No vents, no pipes, nothing that could be making that noise. As I stood there in the darkness, listening to that rhythmic breathing, I felt something I hadn't felt in my 19 years as a deputy. Not fear exactly, but a deep, visceral sense that I was somewhere I shouldn't be, that I was intruding on something. The breathing got faster. I'm not imagining this, I thought. The rhythm has changed. It's breathing faster now. I backed toward the stairs, my flashlight sweeping across the basement one more time. That's when I saw them. Scratches on the concrete walls. Deep gouges, like someone had been trying to claw their way out. They were everywhere, concentrated near the stairs, as if someone had been trying desperately to escape. I took the stairs 2 at a time and practically ran back into the kitchen. Jennifer was still standing by the basement door, and she looked at my face and stepped back. "What did you find?" "Nothing," I said, closing the basement door. "Just an old furnace. The breathing sound is probably air moving through the ductwork." But we both knew that was a lie. I should have left it at that. Should have filed a report noting that the property showed signs of the previous owner's mental deterioration, and left it for the real estate company to deal with. But I couldn't stop thinking about Patricia Merrick alone in that house for 6 years, writing on the walls about breathing, about something that wouldn't let her leave. I started pulling records. Patricia Merrick had called 911 times in the year before she went into the nursing home. Each time she'd reported an intruder in her house. Each time a deputy had responded and found nothing. The reports all noted that Mrs. Merrick seemed confused and possibly suffering from dementia. But one report caught my attention. It was from Deputy Collins, who'd responded to one of the calls about 3 months before Patricia Merrick had been taken to the nursing home. He'd written, "Subject claims she can hear someone breathing in her walls. Stated she has not slept in several days. Appeared extremely agitated and possibly delusional. Recommended family be contacted regarding possible need for medical evaluation. Someone breathing in the walls." I drove back out to the Merrick place that night, off duty in my personal truck. I don't know what I was hoping to find. Maybe I just needed to convince myself that the breathing sound had been my imagination, that the scratches on the basement walls had been there for years, that there was a rational explanation for everything. I parked in the driveway and sat there for a moment, looking at the house. In the darkness, it looked different, more solid somehow, more present, like it was watching me watch it. I got out of the truck and walked up to the front door. It was still unlocked. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The house was completely dark. I turned on my flashlight and swept it across the front hallway. Everything looked the same as it had that afternoon. The sheet-covered furniture, the dusty floors, the yellowed curtains. I stood in the silence and listened. At first, nothing. Then very faintly I heard it, that same breathing sound coming from somewhere deeper in the house. Slow and rhythmic, in and out, in and out. I followed the sound through the front hallway, past the living room, into the kitchen. The basement door was closed just as I'd left it that afternoon. The breathing was louder here, definitely coming from below. I opened the door and looked down into the darkness. The sound echoed up the stairs, impossibly loud now, filling the kitchen. "Hello," I called down. "This is Deputy Kenner with the Hockley County Sheriff's Department. If someone is down there, you need to come up now." The breathing stopped, complete silence. Not even the usual house sounds. No creaking, no settling, nothing. Just absolute silence. Then from the darkness below, a voice. A woman's voice, frail and frightened. "Please help me. It won't let me leave." Patricia Merrick's voice. I recognized it from my interactions with her years ago. But Patricia Merrick had been dead for 8 years. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to leave, to get out of that house and never come back. But I was a deputy. I'd spent 19 years responding to calls, helping people who needed help. And someone down in that basement was asking for help. I started down the stairs. The breathing sound started again, faster now, almost panting. My flashlight beam bounced off the concrete walls as I descended. When I reached the bottom, I swept the light across the basement. It was empty. The same boxes, the same debris, the same old furnace. No one there. "Where are you?" I called out. Here, the voice came from right beside me. So close I should have been able to reach out and touch whoever was speaking. "I'm right here. Can't you see me?" I spun around, my flashlight searching. Nothing. "No one, please," the voice said, and now it was coming from the opposite corner of the basement. "Please help me. I've been here so long. It keeps me here. It breathes and I have to stay and listen." The breathing sound grew louder, coming from the walls, now from the floor, from the ceiling surrounding me. And I realized with a growing sense of horror that the voice was right. This wasn't a sound coming from pipes or ductwork or the acoustics of an old house. This was the house itself breathing, the walls expanding and contracting, the whole structure inhaling and exhaling like a living thing. I ran, dropped my flashlight, and ran for the stairs in complete darkness. Behind me, I could hear that breathing getting faster, more excited, like something that had been waiting was finally getting what it wanted. I hit the stairs and scrambled up them, my hands and knees slamming against the wood. The basement door slammed shut in front of me just as I reached it. I threw my shoulder against it once, twice, and it flew open. I stumbled into the kitchen, grabbed the back door, and ran outside into the night. I didn't stop running until I reached my truck. I got in, locked the doors, and sat there shaking, watching the house. All the windows were dark, but I could see it now. See what I hadn't noticed before. The house was moving almost imperceptibly, but definitely moving. The walls expanding and contracting, breathing. I never went back inside. I filed a report the next day recommending that the property be condemned as structurally unsound. The county agreed, and they put up fencing around the perimeter with no trespassing signs. Jennifer McKenzie called me a week later. She'd been having nightmares, she said. Dreams about being trapped in that house, about writing on walls, about trying to leave, but finding all the doors and windows sealed shut. She wanted to know if I'd experienced anything similar. I lied and told her no. The property still sits there, empty and fenced off. Sometimes I drive past it on my way to Latch. The house looks the same. Gray, clapboard, dark windows, sagging porch. But if you watch it long enough, if you really pay attention, you can see it. That subtle movement, the walls expanding and contracting, breathing. I think about Patricia Merrick sometimes, about her spending 6 years in that house alone, listening to it breathe. About her trying to leave but finding she couldn't. Finding that the house had somehow claimed her, made her part of itself. And I think about that voice I heard in the basement. "I'm right here. Can't you see me?" Maybe she's still there. Maybe the house keeps everyone who stays too long, absorbs them somehow, makes them part of its walls and floors and foundations. Maybe that's why it breathes, because it's full of people who couldn't leave. People who are still there, still listening, still scratching at the walls trying to escape. I retired 3 months after my visit to the Merrick place. Told everyone it was my back. Most days I believe it myself. Most days I can convince myself that what I experienced was just the product of suggestion and an overactive imagination. That old houses make strange sounds. That grief and isolation can make people hear voices that aren't there. But some nights when I'm lying in bed in my apartment in Levelland, I hear it. Faint but unmistakable. The sound of breathing, slow and rhythmic, coming from inside the walls. And I know that the house is still there 12 miles west of town, waiting, breathing, keeping whatever it's claimed. And I know that someday someone else will go inside. Someone else will hear that voice asking for help. And maybe they'll stay too long like Patricia Merrick did. Maybe they'll become part of the house, another voice in the walls, another person trapped in the breathing darkness. Because some houses aren't just buildings. Some houses are alive. And once they've noticed you, once they've felt you walking through their rooms and down their stairs, they never really let you go. I can hear it now. Even as I write this, that soft, rhythmic sound in and out, in and out. The house breathes. And somewhere inside its walls, Patricia Merrick is still listening. Music. My name is Sarah Vance, and I was the only female sheriff in the Texas Panhandle for most of my career. 26 years in Dev Smith County, working cases that ranged from cattle theft to the occasional murder. I saw a lot in those years, enough to know that most mysteries have explanations, even if those explanations aren't always satisfying. But there's one case I worked that still doesn't make sense. Not in any way that follows the rules of logic or physics or anything else I thought I understood about how the world works. It started in August of 2018. We've been having a problem with hit and runs on Highway 60, the main route that runs east-west through Hereford. 3 incidents in 2 months, all fatal, all occurring at night on the same 5-mile stretch of highway between mile markers 23 and 28. The victims were all pedestrians. 2 were local ranch hands who'd been walking along the shoulder after their truck broke down. And 1 was a teenager who'd been at a party and was trying to walk home. Each time, the driver hadn't stopped. No witnesses, no tire marks indicating braking, no evidence left at the scene beyond the bodies themselves. It was like someone was driving that stretch of highway at night, hitting whatever was in front of them, and just continuing on like nothing had happened. State police were involved, of course, but they weren't having any more luck than we were. They set up speed traps, increased patrols, even put up those electronic signs that flash your speed at you. Nothing helped. And then we went almost 3 weeks without an incident. And everyone started to relax, started to think maybe whoever was doing this had moved on or gotten scared off by the increased law enforcement presence. Then we got the call. It was a Tuesday night around 2:30 a.m. I was doing a patrol run along Highway 60, one of several deputies and state troopers who'd been assigned to watch that stretch of road. It was a clear night, warm for August, with a half moon that provided just enough light to see the landscape, flat and empty, stretching out forever in all directions. My radio crackled. All units, we have a report of a pedestrian struck by vehicle on Highway 60. Approximate location, mile marker 25. Witness on scene states the victim is not responsive. EMS is en route. I was less than 2 miles away. Dispatch, Unit 3 responding. ETA 2 minutes. I hit my lights and accelerated. Mile marker 25 was right in the middle of our problem zone. Another hit and run, almost certainly. I found myself gripping the steering wheel harder than necessary. Angry at whoever was doing this. Angry at our inability to catch them. When I reached mile marker 25, I saw a pickup truck pulled over on the shoulder with its hazard lights on. A man was standing next to it, waving his arms. I pulled up behind him and got out. "Sheriff Vance," I said, "you're the one who called this in." He nodded. He was in his 60s, wearing work clothes and a cap that said Deaf Smith County Co-op. His hands were shaking. I was driving home from my daughter's place in Amarillo. Saw him lying right there in the middle of the road. He pointed. I looked where he was pointing and felt my stomach drop. There was a body in the middle of the westbound lane, maybe 30 ft ahead of his truck, face down, not moving, a dark pool spreading out from underneath. "Did you see the vehicle that hit him?" "No, ma'am. He was already down when I came around that curve back there. I almost hit him myself, had to swerve hard. I approached the body already knowing what I'd find. The same as the others. Severe trauma, massive blood loss. But something was different this time. The man was wearing what looked like an old military uniform. Not modern fatigues, but something older. Korean War era maybe, or Vietnam. I knelt down and checked for a pulse, knowing I wouldn't find one. His skin was still warm. This had just happened probably within the last 10 or 15 minutes. I looked up and down the highway. No other vehicles in sight, no tire marks, no debris, nothing to indicate where the vehicle had come from or where it had gone. EMS arrived, then more deputies, then a state trooper. We shut down that section of highway and started processing the scene. The witness, whose name was Carl Henderson, gave his statement. He'd been driving westbound, came around the curb near mile marker 24 and nearly hit the body. He'd stopped immediately and called 911. He hadn't seen any other vehicles on the road. Sheriff Vance, Deputy Martinez called from about 20 ft down the road. "You need to see this." I walked over to where he was standing. He was shining his flashlight on the pavement, highlighting something I'd missed in my initial assessment of the scene. Tire marks, but not the kind you'd expect from a vehicle braking or swerving. These were straight, perfectly straight, leading up to where the body lay, and they were going the wrong direction. Eastbound in the westbound lane. Someone was driving the wrong way, Martinez said. Had to be. These marks show a vehicle heading east, but the body is positioned like it was hit by something going west. I looked at the marks more carefully. He was right. The physics didn't make sense. If a westbound vehicle had hit the victim, the body should have been thrown forward away from the direction of travel. But the body was positioned as if it had been hit by something coming from the opposite direction. Maybe the victim was walking eastbound on the westbound side, I suggested. Crossed into the wrong lane, got hit by an eastbound vehicle in the westbound lane. Then where did that vehicle go? Martinez asked. There's no place to turn around for at least a mile in either direction. And Mr. Henderson said he didn't see any vehicles. We worked the scene for 3 hours. The coroner arrived and confirmed what we already knew. The victim had been killed by massive blunt force trauma, consistent with being struck by a vehicle traveling at high speed. But the coroner also noted something unusual. The injury pattern didn't quite match what you typically see in a pedestrian vehicle collision. The damage was too uniform, too centered on the victim's back and head. Most hidden runs showed glancing impacts, the victim being clipped by a mirror or fender and thrown. This looked like the victim had been hit dead center by something big and fast. "Any ID on the victim?" I asked. Martinez shook his head. Nothing in his pockets. No wallet, no phone, no keys, just the uniform. I looked at the uniform again. It was old but clean, like it had been recently laundered. There were patches on the shoulders, but they were too faded to read in the harsh glare of our work lights. No name tag, no unit designation, nothing to tell us who this man had been. We had the body transported to the medical examiner's office in Amarillo, and I headed back to the station to start the paperwork. But something about the scene bothered me, something I couldn't quite articulate. It wasn't just the wrong way tire marks or the unusual injury pattern. It was something else, something about the location. I pulled up the reports from the previous 3 hidden runs and laid them out on my desk. The first incident had occurred at mile marker 23, the second at mile marker 26, the third at mile marker 28, and now this one at mile marker 25. I stared at the numbers for a long time. 23, 26, 28, 25. No pattern, no progression, just random points along the same 5M stretch of highway. Unless they weren't random. I grabbed a map of Highway 60 and marked each location. When I connected the points in chronological order, they formed a rough zigzag pattern, jumping back and forth along the highway. But when I connected them in numerical order, 23, 25, 26, 28, they formed a straight line. I sat back in my chair staring at the map. What did it mean? Why would someone intentionally hit people at specific mile markers? And how could they do it without leaving any evidence? The next morning, I got a call from the medical examiner. They'd processed the body from the previous night's incident, and they had some information that might help identify the victim. "Sheriff Vance, this is Dr. Morrison in Amarillo. I've got some preliminary findings on your John Doe from last night." "Go ahead, doctor." First thing, fingerprints came back with no match in any database, but we did a dental comparison with missing persons files and we got a hit. That was fast. That's the thing, Sheriff. The match is, well, it's unusual. The dental records match a missing person report filed in 1969. I felt a chill run down my spine. 1969. That's almost 50 years ago. 53 years to be exact. The missing person was a 22-year-old Army private named Thomas Beckworth. He went a wall from Fort Hood in 1969 and was never seen again. But Sheriff, here's where it gets strange. Our John Doe appears to be in his early 20s. If this is Thomas Beckworth, he hasn't aged a day in over 50 years. I sat in silence for a moment trying to process what I was hearing. That's not possible. I know, but the dental records are a perfect match. And there's more. The uniform he was wearing is authentic Army issue from the late 1960s, not a reproduction, not a costume. The real thing down to the thread count and the style of buttons. What are you saying, doctor? I'm saying I don't know what to tell you, Sheriff. All the evidence suggests that this man is or was Thomas Beckworth, but that's physically impossible. After I hung up, I sat at my desk staring at the wall. A man who disappeared in 1969 shows up dead on Highway 60 in 2018, looking exactly as he did when he disappeared. Hit by a vehicle that left no evidence at a specific mile marker that seemed to be part of some kind of pattern. I started digging into Thomas Beckworth's background. The original missing person report was sparse. He'd been stationed at Fort Hood, had gone on leave, and never returned. There had been a brief investigation, but with no evidence of foul play, the Army had eventually classified him as a deserter. But there was something else in the file. A note from the investigating officer stating that Private Beckworth had been acting strangely in the weeks before his disappearance. He'd been telling his fellow soldiers that he'd been having dreams about a highway, about driving the same stretch of road over and over, about seeing people standing on the shoulder who disappeared when he got close to them. The other soldiers had thought he was cracking under the stress of knowing he'd likely be sent to Vietnam. But reading those notes now, with Beckworth's body lying in the medical examiner's office, those dreams took on a different meaning. I decided to drive Highway 60 at night to see if I could figure out what connected these incidents. I waited until after midnight, then started at mile marker 20 and drove slowly east, watching for anything unusual. The highway was empty, just me and the occasional semi passing in the opposite direction. When I reached mile marker 23, the site of the first hidden run, I pulled over and got out. The night was quiet except for the wind and the distant hum of the highway. I stood there for several minutes looking up and down the road trying to see what the victims had seen in their last moments. Nothing. Just empty highway stretching into darkness. I got back in my car and continued to mile marker 25 where we'd found Thomas Beckworth. Same thing, empty road, nothing unusual. I drove to mile marker 26, then 28, stopping at each location and finding nothing. I was about to give up and head back to town when my headlights caught something at mile marker 27, a figure standing on the shoulder, facing away from me toward the empty fields. I slowed down, my hand going instinctively to my weapon. As I got closer, I could see it was a man wearing what looked like an old military uniform. He was standing perfectly still, not looking at me, not moving at all. I pulled over about 20 FT behind him and got out of my car. "Sir, this is Sheriff Vance with DeFifth County. Are you all right?" He didn't respond, didn't turn around, just stood there facing the darkness. I approached slowly, one hand on my weapon. "Sir, I need you to turn around and show me your hands." When I got within 10 FT of him, I could see his uniform clearly in the beam of my flashlight. Army issue, late 1960s, the same era as what Thomas Beckworth had been wearing. "Sir, turn around now." He turned and I saw his face. It was Thomas Beckworth, the same young man whose body was lying in the medical examiner's office in Amarillo. Same face, same age, same everything. But that was impossible. I'd seen his body. I'd watched them loaded into the coroner's van. "You're not real," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked at me with eyes that seemed to see right through me. When he spoke, his voice was hollow, distant, like it was coming from somewhere far away. "I've been walking this highway for 53 years, he said. Every night the same 5 miles, walking and waiting. Waiting for what? For someone to see me, really see me. Not just my body on the road, but me standing here waiting. My radio crackled, making me jump. Unit 3, what's your location?" I reached for the radio but kept my eyes on Thomas Beckworth. "I'm at mile marker 27 conducting a welfare check on a pedestrian." "Copy that, Unit 3. Need backup." I looked at Thomas Beckworth. He was starting to fade, becoming transparent. Through his body, I could see the empty field beyond. Negative, dispatch, false alarm. When I looked back, he was gone, just empty highway and the wind blowing across the plains. I got back in my car and sat there for a long time trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. A dead man walking the highway, visible one moment, gone the next. It should have been impossible, but I knew what I'd seen. I thought about the pattern of the hidden runs. 23, 26, 28, 25. 4 mile markers, but mile marker 27 was missing from the sequence. The mile marker where I'd just seen Thomas Beckworth standing. I pulled up the original missing person report on my laptop. Private Thomas Beckworth had gone missing on August 14, 1969, exactly 49 years ago today. I drove back to mile marker 27, empty now, no sign of the figure I'd seen. But as I stood there on the shoulder, I noticed something I'd missed before. A small metal cross, the kind people put up at accident sites, nearly hidden in the tall grass. It was old, rusted, and when I knelt down to look at it, I could just barely make out a name. Thomas Beckworth and a date, August 14, 1969. He died here, not gone a wall, not deserted. He'd been killed on this stretch of highway 53 years ago, and his body had never been found. The Army had classified him as a deserter, but he'd been dead all along, lying in a ditch somewhere forgotten. And ever since he'd been walking this highway every night, the same 5 miles, walking and waiting for someone to find him, for someone to see him, to acknowledge that he existed, that he died here, that he mattered, but no one saw him. Vehicles passed right by him, right through him, until finally, desperately, he started stepping in front of them, making them hit him, making them stop, making them see that something was there, even if they couldn't see him. 4 times in 2 months, he'd done this. 4 times, he'd forced drivers to acknowledge his presence, even if it meant dying over and over again. And each time he'd appeared at a different mile marker, never the same spot twice, searching for the exact location where he'd originally died, trying to find his way home. I called the medical examiner. "Dr. Morrison, I need you to run another test on our John Doe. I need you to test for anything that would indicate he's been dead longer than we think." There was a pause. "Sheriff, I'm not sure what you're asking. Just trust me on this. Check for anything unusual, anything that doesn't match a recent death." The results came back 2 days later. The tissue samples showed signs of deterioration, consistent with a body that had been dead for decades, not days. The uniform fibers were breaking down in a way that suggested they'd been buried in soil for an extended period. And when they did a more thorough analysis of the dental records, they found that the bone structure showed aging consistent with 50-plus years of degradation. Thomas Beckworth had been dead since 1969, but somehow he'd been walking Highway 60 all these years, invisible to everyone, until he finally found a way to make himself seen. I had his body buried at the Hereford Cemetery with full military honors. The Army, once they heard about the case, sent representatives. They changed his status from deserter to killed in action. Even though he hadn't been killed in any war, they gave him the dignity he'd been denied for over 50 years. After the burial, the hidden run stopped. No more incidents on Highway 60. No more bodies at random mile markers. Thomas Beckworth had found his way home, but I still patrol that stretch of highway sometimes, late at night when the road is empty. And sometimes, just sometimes, I see him standing at mile marker 27, right where that small metal cross marks the spot where he died. He's not trying to step in front of cars anymore. He's just standing there watching the traffic go by, finally at peace. I always slow down when I pass him. Sometimes I even stop and get out, stand there with him for a few minutes in the darkness. I don't say anything and neither does he. We just stand there together, two people who understand that some roads are longer than they appear on maps, that some journeys don't end when they're supposed to, that some people get lost between the mile markers and spend years trying to find their way back. The last time I saw him was about 3 months before I retired. I was driving home from a late shift, and there he was at mile marker 27, standing on the shoulder like always. But this time, when I slowed down, he turned and looked at me and he smiled. Not a sad smile or a grateful smile, just a simple acknowledgement. A thank you for seeing him, for not driving past, for stopping. Then he saluted a proper military salute, crisp and formal, and I found myself saluting back even though I wasn't military and had no right to return that gesture. When I lowered my hand, he was gone. I retired 2 months later. 36 years was enough. I'd seen enough strange things, handled enough cases that didn't make sense, met enough people who existed in that gray area between living and dead. I wanted to spend my remaining years in the daylight where things were simple and explainable. But I still think about Thomas Beckworth, about how he spent 53 years walking the same 5 of highway, invisible and forgotten until he finally found someone who could see him. And I wonder how many others are out there, lost between the mile markers, waiting for someone to notice them, waiting for someone to stop. The new sheriff is a good man named Rodriguez. Smart, dedicated, thorough. I briefed him on most of my active cases during the transition, but I didn't tell him about Thomas Beckworth. How could I? How do you explain a case like that? A man who died in 1969 but kept dying over and over until someone finally buried him properly. Some things can't be briefed. Some things have to be experienced to be understood, and some things are better left as memories. Stories told late at night when the road is empty, and the mile markers slip past like ghosts in the darkness. I live in town now in a small house with a garden that Carol helps me maintain. We sit on the porch in the evenings and watch the sun go down over the plains. Sometimes I tell her about my cases, the ones I can talk about, the cattle thieves and the domestic disputes and the occasional murder. But I don't tell her about Highway 60. About the 5 miles between markers 23 and 28, about the young man in the army uniform who stood on the shoulder every night for over 50 years waiting to be seen. Some stories are meant to stay on the highway where they belong, between the mile markers, in that space where the living and the dead walk the same stretch of road, passing each other in the darkness, sometimes seeing, sometimes not. And maybe that's okay. Maybe we're not supposed to see everything. Maybe some mysteries are meant to stay mysterious. But I'm glad I saw Thomas Beckworth. Glad I stopped. Glad I gave him what he'd been searching for all those years. Acknowledgement, dignity, peace. Because in the end, that's all any of us really want. To be seen, to matter. To know that someone stopped, if only for a moment. To acknowledge that we existed, even if we're nothing but ghosts walking an empty highway, waiting for home. Music. My name is Michael Garrett, and I served as sheriff in Lamb County, Texas, for 21 years before what I found in an evidence locker made me question everything I thought I knew about memory, time, and the nature of truth itself. I'm 61 years old now, living quietly in a rental house in Littlefield, and there are days when I can almost convince myself that what I discovered was some kind of elaborate hoax or mistake. But then I remember the photographs, and I know it wasn't. The whole thing started in March of 2020, right as the world was shutting down for the pandemic. The department was in chaos. We were trying to figure out protocols for arrests during a health crisis, dealing with people panic buying at the stores, responding to domestic disturbances from families suddenly trapped together 24 hours a day. In the middle of all this, we got orders from the county to do a complete inventory of our evidence storage facility. The evidence locker was in the basement of the county courthouse, a windowless room that had been accumulating case materials since the building was constructed in 1947. It was my job to oversee the inventory, make sure everything was properly cataloged, and identify any items that could be destroyed per the retention schedule. It was tedious work, the kind of thing I'd normally delegate to a junior deputy. But with everything else going on, I decided to do it myself. It gave me an excuse to avoid the chaos upstairs. I spent 3 days going through boxes. Most of it was exactly what you'd expect. Sealed evidence bags containing drugs, weapons, stolen property. Each box had a case number and date. Most of the older items were from cases that had been closed decades ago. Their shelf lives long since expired. On the 3rd day, I found a box that didn't have a case number. It was pushed far back on a shelf in the corner, covered in dust. The cardboard was old, deteriorating at the edges, and someone had written on the side in faded marker, "Evidence, no case file 1983. That was unusual. Every piece of evidence was supposed to be associated with a case file, even if the case was never solved. I pulled the box down and opened it. Inside was a manila envelope, also unlabeled. Inside the envelope were 37 photographs. They were Polaroids, the kind people used before digital cameras became common. The images were faded with age. The color shifted toward yellow and orange, but they were clear enough to see what they depicted. The first photograph showed a crime scene, a body lying in what looked like a wheat field face down, one arm extended. The photo was taken during daylight, and I could see tire tracks in the dirt nearby. The second photograph showed the same scene from a different angle. This one included a sheriff's patrol car in the background, the kind we used in the early 1980s. I looked through all 37 photographs. They documented what appeared to be a homicide investigation, the body in the field, close-ups of evidence markers, shots of tire tracks and footprints, photos of items that had been collected. There were also several photographs of what looked like witnesses or suspects being interviewed. But here's what made my skin crawl. In several of the photographs, specifically the wide shots that showed multiple deputies working the scene, I could see myself, not someone who looked like me. Me, 21 years old in a deputy's uniform, standing near the body. In one photo, I was kneeling next to an evidence marker. In another, I was talking to what appeared to be the medical examiner. I stared at those photographs for a long time. The problem was simple. I hadn't joined the Lamb County Sheriff's Department until 1999. In 1983, I would have been 4 years old, living with my parents in Loke. I certainly wasn't a deputy sheriff investigating homicides. I looked more carefully at the other people in the photographs. In one shot, I recognized Sheriff Walter Hayes, who'd run the department from 1978 to 1989. He'd been dead for almost 15 years. In another photo, I saw Deputy Jim Morrison, who'd retired in 1995 and moved to Arizona. And there, In the background of a photo showing the crime scene perimeter was the old courthouse, except it looked exactly as it had in the early 1980s before the renovation that had changed the front entrance. These were definitely photographs from 1983, but I was in them at age 21, wearing a deputy's uniform, investigating a crime scene. I took the box and photographs up to my office and locked the door. Then I started searching through our archived case files from 1983, looking for any homicide investigations that matched what I saw in the photographs. There were 3 homicides that year, 2 domestic shootings and 1 bar fight that turned fatal. None of them had occurred in a wheat field. None of them matched the crime scene in the photographs. I expanded my search to surrounding counties. Nothing. I checked with the state database for unsolved homicides. Still nothing. According to every record I could find, the crime scene in those photographs had never existed, which meant those photographs shouldn't exist either, but they did, and I was in them. I didn't tell anyone about the photographs. What would I say? That I'd found evidence of a case I'd worked on 17 years before I became a deputy. That I appeared in photographs from when I was 4 years old, looking exactly as I did when I was 21. Instead, I started trying to identify the victim. The body in the photographs was male, probably in his 30s, wearing jeans and a plaid shirt. His face was turned away from the camera in most shots, but there was one close-up that showed his profile. I didn't recognize him, but I photographed that image and started showing it around to some of the older deputies and retired officers. Nobody recognized him. Nobody remembered any case like the one in the photographs. I tried a different approach. I took one of the wide shots that clearly showed the location, a wheat field with a county road visible in the background and a distinctive water tower on the horizon, and started driving around the county looking for that specific location. It took me 2 full days, but I found it. County Road 597, about 8 mi south of Littlefield. The wheat field was still there, though it looked like it hadn't been cultivated in years. The water tower was still visible on the horizon, and the curve in the road matched exactly. I parked on the shoulder and walked out into the field. It was late afternoon, the sun, low in the sky, casting long shadows across the stubbled ground. I walked to approximately where the body had been in the photographs and stood there trying to understand what I was looking at. The field was empty, just dirt and dried wheat stalks and the wind blowing across the flat expanse of West Texas. But as I stood there, I had the strangest sensation, like I'd been here before. Not in that vague déjà vu way, but actually been here. Stood in this exact spot, looked down at a body lying in the dirt. I could almost see it. The victim's extended arm, the evidence markers, the other deputies working the perimeter. Sheriff Hayes standing near his patrol car talking into his radio, and me kneeling next to the body, younger than I'd ever been as a deputy, taking notes in a spiral notebook. The memory, if that's what it was so vivid that I actually looked down, half expecting to see the body still there, but there was nothing, just empty field. I went back to my car and called Jim Morrison in Arizona. We'd worked together for several years before he retired, and he'd always been straight with me. Jim, it's Michael Garrett. I need to ask you something strange. Shoot. Sheriff, do you remember working a homicide case in 1983? Body found in a wheat field south of town. There was a long pause. 1983. Hell, Michael, that's almost 40 years ago. Why are you asking? I found some old evidence, photographs, trying to match them to a case file, but I can't find one. What did the victim look like? I described what I'd seen in the photographs. Another long pause. That's weird, Jim finally said. I don't remember that case, and I worked every homicide in Lamb County from 1979 to 995. If there had been a body in a field, I would have been there. You were there, I said. You're in the photographs. Then I should remember it, but I don't. Not even a little bit. After I hung up, I sat in my car for a long time, watching the sun go down over that empty field. The more I learned, the less sense any of this made. The case didn't exist in any records. Nobody remembered it. But the photographs were real, and they showed me and several other deputies investigating a crime scene that apparently never happened. Over the next 2 weeks, I became obsessed with those photographs. I studied every detail, trying to find some explanation. I had the Polaroids examined by a forensic specialist who confirmed they were authentic images from the early 1980s, not modern reproductions or digital manipulations. The paper, the chemical composition of the film, even the degradation patterns, all consistent with photographs that were nearly 40 years old. I also made a disturbing discovery. In one of the photographs, I was standing near an evidence marker, and you could clearly see a badge number on my uniform, 47. I checked the department records. Badge 047 had been issued to a deputy named Michael Garrett in 1982. He'd worked for the department for less than a year before dying in a car accident in February 1983. His name was Michael Garrett, my name, but we weren't related. He was 21 years old when he died. I was born in 1979, so I would have been 4 years old at the time. I found his personnel file in the archives. There was a photograph attached, his official department photo from when he was hired. I stared at that photograph for a long time. He looked like me, not similar to me. Identical to me, same face, same build, same everything. According to the file, Deputy Michael Garrett had been hired in March 1982. He'd worked patrol, handled routine calls, showed promise as an investigator. Then on February 23, 1983, he'd been killed when his patrol car skidded on ice and hit a tree on County Road 300. He was buried at the Littlefield Cemetery. Never married, no children, no living relatives. I drove to the cemetery and found his grave. Simple headstone. Michael Robert Garrett, 1961 to 1983. There were no flowers, no indication that anyone had visited in years. I stood there looking at that headstone and felt reality start to slip away from me. This man, this deputy who died almost 40 years ago, looked exactly like me, had the same name as me, and appeared in photographs investigating a crime scene that didn't exist. The rational part of my brain was screaming that this had to be coincidence, that there had to be an explanation. Maybe the Polaroids had been mislabeled. Maybe I had a distant relative I didn't know about. Maybe the whole thing was an elaborate prank, but I knew none of those explanations fit. The photographs were real. The deputy was real. And somehow, impossibly, we were the same person. I started having dreams after that. Vivid, detailed dreams about working that case. In the dreams, I was Deputy Garrett, 21 years old, responding to a call about a body in a wheat field. I could see every detail, the early morning light, the way the wind moved through the wheat, the smell of the earth. I could feel the weight of my duty belt, hear Sheriff Hayes' voice on the radio, see Jim Morrison's face as we stood over the body. and in the dreams I knew who the victim was. His name was Robert Chambers, and he'd been a ranch hand from mules. Someone had shot him in the back and left him in that field. We never solved it, never found who did it. The case went cold, and eventually everyone forgot about it except Robert Chambers had never existed. I checked every record I could find. No one by that name had ever lived in Mules or anywhere else in Lamb County. No one by that name had been reported missing in 1983. There was no body, no case, no investigation. But the dreams continued, and each time they were more detailed. I could remember conversations I'd had with other deputies. I could remember Sheriff Hayes telling me to canvass the nearby farms, looking for witnesses. I could remember standing in that field as the sun went down, knowing we weren't going to solve this case, knowing that Robert Chambers would never get justice. And then in one dream, I remembered something else. I remembered driving home after my shift ended, remembered the road covered in ice, remembered losing control of my patrol car, remembered the tree rushing toward me, remembered the impact, remembered dying. I woke up from that dream at 3:00 in the morning, drenched in sweat, my heart racing. I got up and stood at my bedroom window looking out at the empty street. The memory of that car accident felt as real as any memory from my actual life, more real even. I could still feel the steering wheel in my hands, could still hear the crunch of metal, could still feel that final moment of clarity before everything went dark. But I hadn't died in a car accident. I was alive. I was 54 years old, sheriff of Lamb County, standing in my bedroom in the year 2020, unless I wasn't. I went back to that wheat field one more time. It was late April and the temperature had climbed into the 80s. The field was empty, baking in the afternoon sun. I walked to the spot where the body had been, where, according to my dreams, Robert Chambers had been shot and killed in 1983. I knelt down and put my hand on the dry earth. And as soon as I touched the ground, I knew, not in a mystical or supernatural way, just knew, the way you know your own name. I had been here before, not as Michael Garrett, the sheriff, but as Michael Garrett, the deputy. I had investigated this case. I had stood in this field taking photographs. I had searched for evidence that would never be found. And then 3 days after finding Robert Chambers' body, I had died in a car accident on an icy road. But somehow I had also kept living. Somehow that accident hadn't happened and I'd grown up in Latch, gone to college, joined the sheriff's department in '99, and worked my way up to sheriff. I'd lived a completely different life. A life where Deputy Michael Garrett died in 1983, where Robert Chambers was never murdered, where those 37 Polaroids documented a case that never existed. Two realities somehow overlapping, two versions of the same life running parallel to each other. And for reasons I couldn't understand, I could remember both. I stood up and looked around the field. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the ground, and for just a moment I could see them. The other deputies, the patrol cars, Sheriff Hayes standing near his vehicle. I could see the body lying in the dirt, one arm extended. I could see my younger self kneeling beside the evidence markers. Then I blinked and they were gone. Just an empty field and the wind. I never told anyone about the photographs. I sealed them back in the envelope, put them in the box, and stored them in my personal safe at home. The official inventory showed that storage space is empty. As far as anyone knows, those photographs don't exist. But I know they do, and I know what they mean. Somewhere, somehow, there's another version of my life. A version where I died at 21, where Robert Chambers was murdered in a wheat field, where that case went unsolved. And for reasons I'll never understand, I can remember both lives. The life I lived and the life I didn't live. Sometimes late at night, I take out those photographs and look at them. I study my younger face, trying to reconcile the person in those images with the person I am now. Trying to understand how I can be both people simultaneously. I retired 6 months ago, told everyone I wanted to spend more time with my family, enjoy my remaining years, all the usual reasons people give. But the truth is, I couldn't do the job anymore. Couldn't walk past the courthouse basement where I'd found those photographs. Couldn't drive past that field without feeling the weight of 2 different lives pressing down on me. The new sheriff is a good woman named Patricia Torres. She's thorough, dedicated, exactly what the county needs. I met with her during the transition, showed her the active cases, walked her through the department procedures. I didn't tell her about the storage room in the courthouse basement, about the box that shouldn't exist, about the photographs that document a reality that never happened. Some things can't be explained. Some things have to be carried alone. I still live in Littlefield. I drive past that cemetery sometimes, past the grave of Deputy Michael Garrett, 1961-1, 1983. Sometimes I stop and stand by his headstone. This man who was me but wasn't me. Who died at 21 but also lived to be 61. And sometimes on clear days when the light is just right, I drive out to that field on County Road 5 and 97. I park on the shoulder and walk out into the wheat stubble to the spot where Robert Chambers died or didn't die, where I investigated a murder that never happened, where 2 versions of reality touch each other like overlapping photographs. The field is always empty when I visit, but I can feel them there. The echoes of that other life, that other investigation, that other version of myself. They're real in a way that transcends documentation or evidence or official records. They exist because I remember them. Because somewhere in the overlap between what happened and what might have happened, there's a version of Michael Garrett who stood in this field taking photographs of a crime scene that the rest of the world has forgotten or maybe never knew about in the first place. I'll never know which reality is the true one. The one where I died at 21 or the one where I lived to retirement. Maybe both are true. Maybe reality is more fluid than we want to believe. And sometimes the past isn't as fixed as we think it is. All I know for certain is this: those photographs exist. I exist. And somewhere between those 2 facts is a truth that I'll spend the rest of my life trying to understand. The wheat field lies empty under the Texas sun. The evidence locker in the courthouse basement sits undisturbed. And 37 Polaroids rest in my safe, documenting a case that may or may not have happened, investigated by a deputy who may or may not have been me. Some mysteries don't get solved. Some questions don't have answers. And some photographs show us things we're not meant to see. Glimpses of the lives we didn't live, the deaths we didn't die, the realities we don't inhabit. I look at those photographs sometimes and wonder, which Michael Garrett am I? The one who died or the one who lived? Maybe I'm both. Maybe that's the only answer that makes sense. And maybe in the end that has to be enough. Music. My name is James Holland, and I spent 28 years as a deputy and sheriff in Castro County, Texas, before I understood that some buildings remember everything that happens inside them. Not in the way people remember, with thoughts and emotions and the gradual fading that comes with time. Buildings remember differently. They absorb, they hold. And sometimes when you're alone in them late at night, they play back what they've absorbed. I'm 59 years old now, living in a small apartment in Dimmitt, and I haven't been inside the Castro County Sheriff's Station since the night I turned in my badge. That was 4 years ago. The building is still there, still operating, still housing the department that serves the county, but I can't go near it. Can't even drive past it without feeling my chest tighten and my hands start to shake, because I know what that building does when no one else is listening. The Castro County Sheriff's Station was built in 1952, a simple brick structure on the south side of Dimmitt. It's been expanded over the years. A new wing in the 70s for holding cells. An addition in the 90s for more office space. A complete renovation of the dispatch center in 2008, but the core of the building, the original structure, remained unchanged. The main office where I worked for most of my career was part of that original construction. Solid brick walls, high ceilings, wooden floors that creaked in places. The kind of building that had character, people said, history. I'd always liked working late. The station was quieter after the day shift went home, easier to focus on paperwork and case files. My wife Emma understood. She'd go to bed around 10:00, and I'd come home around midnight or 1:00 in the morning. We'd been married for 31 years, and we'd fallen into that comfortable routine that long marriages develop. The first time I heard it was on a Tuesday night in November of 2019. I was alone in the main office working on budget reports that were due at the end of the week. It was around 11:30 and the building was empty except for Deputy Barnes, who was manning the dispatch desk down the hall. I was typing when I heard voices, faint, distant, like someone was having a conversation in another room. I stopped typing and listened. The voices continued for maybe 10 seconds, then stopped. I couldn't make out words, just the rhythmic pattern of speech. Someone talking, someone responding. I got up and walked to the hallway, empty. The lights were on, fluorescent panels humming overhead. Deputy Barnes was visible through the window of the dispatch center, headphones on, monitoring the radio. No one else in sight. I walked back to my office and sat down. Probably just voices carrying from outside, I thought. Sound does strange things in old buildings. I went back to my budget reports. 5 minutes later, I heard it again. This time, it was clearer. A man's voice speaking urgently, but not shouting. I couldn't understand the words, but I could hear the tone, stressed, upset about something. Then another voice, calmer, responding. I stood up and walked into the hallway again, still empty. I checked the conference room, the break room, the evidence storage area, all empty. Deputy Barnes was still at his desk, undisturbed. "Hey, Barnes," I called through the dispatch window. "You hearing any voices out here?" He pulled off his headphones. "Sorry, Sheriff. Voices like someone talking." Thought I heard something from the hallway. He shook his head. Been quiet all night, just me and the radio. I went back to my office, but I couldn't focus on the budget reports anymore. I sat there listening, waiting for the voices to come back. They didn't. After about 20 minutes, I decided I was just tired hearing things that weren't there. I packed up my files and went home. But the next night, I heard them again. Same time around 11:30. Same pattern. A man's voice, urgent and stressed. Another voice responding. This time, I stayed perfectly still and listened carefully. The voices were coming from somewhere inside the building, not from outside, and they seemed to be coming from the walls themselves. I know how that sounds, like the beginning of a horror story or the delusions of someone under too much stress. But I was 55 years old, in good health, not prone to flights of imagination. I knew what I was hearing. Voices in the walls. Over the next week, I heard them almost every night I worked late. Always around 11:30. Always the same pattern. Urgent male voice, calm responding voice. Sometimes the conversation would last only a few seconds. Sometimes it would go on for a minute or more, but I could never make out actual words. It was like listening to a conversation through water. The meaning obscure, but the emotion clear. I started staying later, trying to identify exactly where the voices were coming from. I'd walk through the building with my ear against the walls, trying to pinpoint the source. But the strange thing was the voices didn't seem to come from any specific location. They came from everywhere at once, like the building itself was speaking. I didn't tell anyone about the voices. What would I say? That the sheriff's station was haunted, that I was hearing phantom conversations in the walls. I'd worked in law enforcement long enough to know how that would sound. Instead, I started researching the building's history. I pulled old newspaper archives, talked to retired deputies, looked through department records from the 50s and 60s. I was looking for anything unusual. Deaths in the building, violent incidents, anything that might explain what I was hearing. What I found was fairly routine. The building had been the site of countless interviews, interrogations, and arrests over its 70 years of operation. There had been a few violent incidents. A suspect who'd attacked a deputy in 1967, a domestic violence case that had gotten out of hand in the holding cells in 1984, a deputy who died of a heart attack at his desk in '91, but nothing that stood out as particularly traumatic or unusual for a police station. Then I found something in the archives that made me pause. In March of 1953, less than a year after the building opened, a man named Henry Pritchard had been brought in for questioning in connection with the murder of his wife. According to the newspaper reports, Pritchard had maintained his innocence throughout the interrogation, but something had happened during the questioning. The reports were vague, but apparently Pritchard had become agitated and violent. He'd had to be restrained. The interrogation had lasted several hours, ending around midnight. Henry Pritchard was convicted of murder and executed in 1954. He maintained his innocence until the end. I found the old case file in our archives. Most of it was standard material. Witness statements, evidence logs, trial transcripts. But there was something odd about the interrogation notes. They were incomplete, fragmentary. The deputy who'd conducted the interrogation, a man named Walter Duncan, had written brief summaries of what was discussed, but there were large gaps in the timeline. Sections marked recording equipment malfunction or notes a label. It was like parts of the interrogation had been deliberately obscured or forgotten. I kept digging. I found Deputy Duncan's personnel file. He'd worked for the department from 1950 to 1955, then had resigned without explanation. No forwarding address, no indication of where he'd gone or what he'd done afterward. Just a resignation letter dated April 1955, 2 months after Henry Pritchard's execution. The resignation letter was brief and formal, but there was a handwritten note at the bottom. I can't be in that building anymore. I can't keep hearing it. I stared at that note for a long time. Deputy Duncan had heard something in the building, heard it enough that he couldn't work there anymore. Heard it enough that he'd quit a job he'd held for 5 years. That night, I stayed at the station until after midnight. I sat in my office with the lights off, waiting. At 11:30, the voices started, but this time I didn't try to find their source. I just sat and listened. And slowly, gradually, I started to make out words. I didn't kill her. I swear to God, I didn't kill her. Mr. Pritchard, we have witnesses who saw you arguing with your wife the night she died. We argued, yes, but I didn't kill her. I loved her. Then explain how she ended up dead in your barn with your hunting rifle next to her body. I can't explain it. I don't know, but I didn't do it. The conversation continued back and forth. The same pattern I'd been hearing for weeks, but now I could understand it. Now I knew what I was listening to. I was hearing Henry Pritchard's interrogation from March 1953. The building had absorbed it somehow, recorded it in its walls and floors and ceiling. And now, 66 years later, it was playing it back. I should have left it alone. Should have accepted that old buildings sometimes carry echoes of past events and moved on with my life. But I couldn't because something about that interrogation bothered me. Something about the way Henry Pritchard's voice sounded. Not guilty or evasive, but genuinely confused. Genuinely desperate to be believed. I went back to the case file and read through it more carefully. The evidence against Pritchard had been circumstantial but compelling. He and his wife had been heard arguing the night of her death. His rifle had been found next to her body. He had powder residue on his hands. His fingerprints were on the weapon. But there were inconsistencies. The angle of the gunshot wound didn't match Pritchard's height. The powder residue was consistent with handling the weapon, but not necessarily with firing it. And several witnesses had seen someone else near the Pritchard property that night. A man in dark clothing who'd been walking along the road near their farm. The investigation had focused entirely on Henry Pritchard. The man in dark clothing had never been identified or questioned. I started pulling newspaper archives from 1953, looking for any other information about the case. What I found made my blood run cold. 2 years after Henry Pritchard's execution, another woman had been killed in Castro County, shot with a hunting rifle, body found in a barn. The husband had been questioned but released. The case had never been solved. 3 years after that, another woman. Same pattern. Hunting rifle, barn, husband questioned and released. 4 more cases over the next 15 years, all unsolved. All following the same pattern that had gotten Henry Pritchard convicted and executed. Henry Pritchard had been innocent and the building knew it. I started staying at the station every night, listening to that interrogation play over and over. I transcribed every word I could make out, comparing it to the fragmentary notes in the original case file. And the more I listened, the more I understood. The interrogation had lasted 8 hours, but the official record only documented 3. 5 hours were missing from the file. 5 hours during which I now believed Henry Pritchard had said something that didn't fit the narrative the department wanted, something that suggested his innocence. I found Deputy Duncan's home address in the 1955 census records. He'd moved to Amarillo after leaving the department. I called information, but there was no listing for Walter Duncan. I tried the Amarillo Public Library, asked them to search their obituaries. They found one. Walter Duncan died in 1987, age 72. No surviving family, but the obituary mentioned that Duncan had been a member of the Amarillo Baptist Church. I called the church. explained I was a sheriff looking for information about a former deputy. The secretary was helpful. She found some old records and called me back. Sheriff Holland, I found something interesting. Mr. Duncan left a sealed envelope with the church when he died. Instructions were that it should be opened only if someone from law enforcement came asking about his time in Castro County. Do you want me to open it? Yes, please. She put me on hold. When she came back, her voice was different, quieter, uncertain. Sheriff, this letter is its address to whoever opened it. Mr. Duncan wrote it in 1986, about a year before he died. Would you like me to read it to you, please? She cleared her throat and began reading. To whoever is reading this, if you're here asking about Castro County, then you know. You've heard the building. You've heard Henry Pritchard begging us to believe him. You've heard me interrogating an innocent man. I was young and ambitious in 1953 when Henry Pritchard's wife was killed. The sheriff wanted a quick arrest. The evidence pointed to Pritchard, and I didn't question it. I interrogated him for 8 hours. He never changed his story, never admitted guilt, never wavered in his insistence that he didn't kill his wife. By hour 6, I knew he was telling the truth. I knew we had the wrong man, but I'd already written my report. The sheriff had already talked to the press. The county wanted justice. So I finished the interrogation. I wrote up the notes the way they needed to be written. I testified at trial, and I watched an innocent man get convicted and executed. 2 years later, another woman was killed the same way. Same pattern, same evidence, but by then, Pritchard was dead. The case went cold, and I understood what I'd done. I tried to go back to work, tried to pretend everything was normal, but I couldn't stay in that building because every night I could hear it, the interrogation playing over and over. Pritchard's voice saying, "I didn't kill her." My voice responding with questions designed to trap him, not to find the truth. The building remembered, and it wouldn't let me forget. I'm an old man now, and I'll be dead soon. Maybe after I'm gone, the building will stop. Maybe it only plays back the worst thing that happened there, the worst failure, the worst injustice. Or maybe it remembers everything, and I just couldn't bear to stay long enough to hear it all. If you're hearing Henry Pritchard's voice, don't ignore it. Don't pretend it's not real. The building is trying to tell you something. It's trying to correct a wrong that can never be made right. Listen to it and do better than I did. Walter Duncan, March 1986. I sat at my desk, holding the phone, staring at nothing. The building had known for 66 years, and it had been trying to tell anyone, that an innocent man had been executed. I couldn't fix what had happened to Henry Pritchard. Couldn't bring him back or clear his name in any official way, but I could tell his story. I could make sure people knew. I wrote a letter to the county commissioners explaining what I'd found. I included copies of the case files, the newspaper articles about the subsequent unsolved murders, Deputy Duncan's letter. I made the case that Henry Pritchard had been wrongfully convicted and that his name should be posthumously cleared. The commissioners reviewed the evidence and agreed. In December 2019, 65 years after his execution, Henry Pritchard was officially exonerated. The county issued a formal apology to his descendants, a great-great-nephew who still lived in Texas. And after that, the voices in the station stopped. I worked 4 more years at the station, but I never stayed late again. Couldn't bring myself to be in that building after dark because even though the interrogation had stopped playing, I knew the building was still listening, still recording, still absorbing everything that happened within its walls. And I wondered what else it remembered, what other conversations, other confessions, other moments of truth and lies had been absorbed into the brick and wood and concrete. What else would it play back years or decades from now to whoever was willing to listen? I retired in 2020 right as the pandemic was shutting everything down. Told everyone I wanted to spend more time with Emma. I travel a little, enjoy my remaining years. All true, but not the whole truth. The whole truth was that I couldn't work in that building anymore. Couldn't walk those hallways knowing what they'd absorbed. Couldn't sit at my desk wondering if someday my voice would echo from the walls too. Wondering what moments the building had recorded of me. What conversations would play back long after I was gone. The new sheriff is a good man named Rodriguez. Young, smart, dedicated. I met with him during the transition, showed him the files, explained the procedures. I told him about Henry Pritchard, about the exoneration, about why it was important to listen when people say they're innocent. But I didn't tell him about the voices. Didn't warn him about staying late in the building. Didn't explain that the station remembers everything. Some things people have to discover on their own. Some lessons can't be taught, only learned. I still live in Dimmitt. I drive past the station sometimes. Can see it from the main road. It looks the same as always. Solid brick, flag out front, patrol cars in the lot. Just another small town sheriff's station in West Texas. But I know what it is. I know what it does. It listens and it remembers. And when the time is right, when someone is there alone and willing to hear, it plays back what it's absorbed. The truth that was ignored, the innocence that was dismissed, the voices that were silenced. Sometimes I wonder if Rodriguez has heard it yet. If he stayed late working on paperwork and suddenly heard voices coming from the walls. If he's had that moment of confusion, then realization, then horror as he understands what the building is telling him. I hope he has. I hope he listened. I hope he did something with what he heard because that's what the building wants. Not revenge or haunting or fear, just acknowledgement, just someone willing to listen to what it's been trying to say all these years. The truth doesn't go away just because we don't want to hear it. It stays absorbed in the places where it was spoken, waiting, patient, hoping that someday someone will listen. Emma died last year. Cancer. It was quick. At least 3 months from diagnosis to the end. I held her hand in the hospital and she looked at me with those clear blue eyes and said, "You never told me about the voices, did you?" I started to deny it, but she stopped me. I knew you were hearing something. All those nights you came home late looking shaken. I knew, but I figured you'd tell me when you were ready. She paused, took a shallow breath. Did you help him? The man whose voice you heard? Yes, I said, I helped him. She smiled. Good, that's good. Those were almost her last words to me. She died 2 hours later. I think about that conversation a lot, about how Emma knew even when I didn't tell her, about how she understood that some burdens can't be shared, can only be carried, about how she waited patiently for me to be ready to talk and accepted it when I never was. I live alone now in a small apartment that's too quiet. Sometimes late at night, I lie awake and listen to the silence. And I think about the Castro County Sheriff's Station, standing solid and patient in the darkness, absorbing everything that happens within its walls. I think about all the voices it must hold now, all the interrogations and interviews and confessions and lies, all the truth and all the deception recorded in brick and wood waiting to be played back. I think about Deputy Duncan, unable to bear hearing his own voice interrogating an innocent man. I think about Henry Pritchard, executed for a crime he didn't commit, his desperate pleas absorbed into the walls of the station where he'd been questioned. And I think about my own voice recorded in that building during 28 years of service. All the interviews I conducted, all the questions I asked, all the times I believed someone or didn't believe them. Somewhere in those walls, my voice is preserved, saying things I don't even remember saying. What will the building play back about me? What moments of failure or success, truth or deception, justice or injustice will echo through those hallways long after I'm gone? I'll never know. And maybe that's better. Maybe we're not meant to know how we'll be remembered, what parts of ourselves will be preserved, and what parts forgot. All I know is this: buildings remember, they absorb and hold, and when the time is right, they tell their stories. And somewhere in Castro County, there's a sheriff's station that knows more truth than anyone wants to hear. It's still there, still operating, still serving the county, still listening to everything that happens within its walls, still waiting for someone to hear what it has to say. I hope whoever hears it next listens carefully. I hope they take the time to understand what the building is trying to tell them. I hope they do better than Deputy Duncan did, better than I did, because the building will remember them too. And someday, years from now, their voice will echo from those walls preserved forever in brick and concrete and time. And maybe, if we're lucky, those voices will speak of justice, of truth, of doing the right thing even when it's difficult. That's what I hope for anyway. That's what I tell myself on the nights when I can't sleep, when the silence is too heavy and the darkness too deep. The building listens. The building remembers. And someday the building will speak. All we can do is hope that when it does, it tells a story worth hearing.